Hello, everybody. I'm Stephen Collicot from Purdue University. I'm welcoming you here to this event for the Astronaut Scholarship and Honors College Visiting Scholars Program. And this is a leading up to the live event on February 23rd, where our esteemed guest here will give the award to three scholars from Purdue: Maya Clare, Zachary Marshall, and Lindsay Wilson. So today we have with us Dick Covey, and Dick has been an Air Force pilot, Purdue astronaut. He has been a Purdue aerospace engineering graduate student, a NASA astronaut, aerospace industry chief operating officer and chief executive officer, and his honors include the Outstanding Aerospace Engineer Award from Purdue University. I'm a professor of aerospace engineering at Purdue, a lifelong space enthusiast, and someone who has I've formed a career out of building and flying and launching low-gravity fluid dynamics experiments in many types of vehicles. So I first met Dick at an evening student event outside of the NASA Johnson Space Center on one of these zero-gravity flight experiment trips, and it's always a genuine pleasure to talk with him again. And now I think you'll see what I mean as we want to ask you some questions, Dick. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So first off, you have been successful at being a student, military officer, military pilot, flight test engineer, astronaut, industry leader, co-leader of return to flight planning for the space shuttle, and more. Is there a theme or two running through these diverse experiences that aided you in delivering or on responsibility or in being a strong team member? What do you think?
Now, if I were to say what's the one thing that has allowed me to progress through all of those activities, careers, if you would, and be successful, it's the concept of lifelong learning. Every step along the way, I continue to find ways to learn based upon what I'd already learned and what I needed to know for that next job or that next activity. And I can't overemphasize that. No one is ever going to be able to progress to their utmost without continuing to learn their entire life in one way or another.
Excellent. Thank you. So then I mentioned your service on this commission, the Stafford Covey Commission, that people view your service there with respect, and as it was very important work to return our nation's fleet of space shuttles back to flight status. People view that as work you delivered on, but are there things you learned during that experience about engineering, teamwork, leadership, and such that you can share with our students, or can you advise them on how to address challenges which may seem immensely complex and difficult at the start?
The Stafford Covey task group was an interesting situation in that the people that were appointed to the task group were largely chosen by someone other than leaders of the task group, and were very skilled, educated, and successful people in their own right from a variety of different backgrounds. Uh, the the task of taking that type of a group of this very diverse, successful people and getting them together to be able to focus on the task group's end, which was basically to make sure that we had adequately reviewed the actions NASA had taken in response to the accident investigation board for the Columbia, loss of Columbia, and the things they had said NASA should do before they fly again. And we got the task of going and reviewing what they said they were doing to make a judgment on whether that was going to meet the criteria established by the accident board. Everybody has differing views. And particularly when you have high-charged, educated, successful people, they're pretty adamant in their views. So what I learned was the main thing we had to do as leaders was to make sure that the right data was presented in the right way to those people so that they could come to common decisions, common agreement and understanding of the progress that had been made by NASA. That was the most important thing we could do. And doing that and giving people the data that they need and the environment they need and the ability to express their opinions, then we were able to find common ground and be able to be successful in reviewing the actions NASA had taken.
Nice, nice. And let's move on then. So, of course, astronauts fly in space. Now, while you were an astronaut, you also had many terrestrial duties, earthbound duties. Of those earthbound duties, which or what did you find most challenging technically or most satisfying when it was completed?
Well, there's two activities I'd probably look at the most. One of them, I can't say it was terrestrial because it involved flying. Uh, it wasn't in space, but it was flying. On the third space shuttle mission, I was the lead chase pilot flying a NASA T-38. My job was to rendezvous with and follow the space shuttle Columbia to a landing at the White Sands Missile Range. And as high performance pilots learn to fly formation, we learn how to do rendezvous and rejoins. But rejoining with a space shuttle that is entering the atmosphere, has entered the atmosphere, and then coming close to its landing, obviously below 50,000 feet, and trying to join up with it was the most challenging rendezvous, airborne rendezvous that I had the opportunity to not only practice for, but to actually experience. It was complicated by STS-3, the third space shuttle flight was the first one and the only one to not make an overhead turn to a landing. Now, overhead turns are easier to join up with an airplane. You just get more maneuvering space and it's easier. When there's not much of a turn, then to join up the rejoin with at high speed is more difficult. So that was one that was probably the most technically challenging, as well as operationally challenging, because it takes all those technical aspects of a rejoin and have to do it in the physical environment of being in the air. So that was one. The other one, and sometimes you might not think of this as being technically challenging, but it was as a spacecraft communicator. So on all the space shuttle missions, the voice that you hear that went from the control center to the spacecraft was always an astronaut. And there was a reason for that, was because the astronaut was determined and thought to be the best one to be able to adequately and in a timely manner take the information that needed to be transmitted from the control center and get it to the crew. So the technical challenge there was to keep the actions, information that the mission control wanted to get to the astronauts aboard the space shuttle, to get it to them in a way that was going to be readily and quickly understandable and actionable by the astronauts. So in that respect, a communications job became very difficult technically, to be the translator from the control center to the crew. It was also a very satisfying job, and as was being a chase pilot. So those were the two that probably I found the most technically challenging and rewarding.
Excellent. Yes, I have seen some of my own questions to astronauts during ISS experiment operations filtered through a short chain, and it's a challenge for people to spontaneously process what one person wants and format it for somebody else. Okay, so in your college days, let me paint a little picture here. In your college days, you depended on a slide rule to get through engineering, and now you carry a very smart phone. During this time, we also went from Mercury flights to commercial crew delivery to and from the largest vehicle ever in space, the amazing International Space Station. So, can I ask you to look forward and speculate what these students watching us today should anticipate for progress in the next 50 years?
Well, progress is, I mean, it's almost unimaginable where we might be. If you look at the rate of change in things now, based on technologies that are emerging and being and growing, I can't really even envision what it might be in 55 years. Obviously, um, you know, when I was a kid, we used to read Dick Tracy uh, cartoons, and he would talk to his watch, and everybody thought, well, okay, and he could he could communicate through his watch, and that was bizarre, but now it's reality. It actually exists. Those same types of changes with automation, robotics are just going to continue. As on the space side, I think in 50 years we'll have seen the colonization of the moon with a permanent manned human base, and perhaps even on Mars. I think that's certainly something that could happen in 55 years. But then I would have said that 50 years ago when men were landing on the moon that we have done that. I think we're going to see the technologies that will evolve to be able to enable that. I think they're there. It's a practical application of them.
Very nice. So, in a similar theme, but it ends up with a different emphasis here. In hindsight, when I started graduate school in 1983, it turns out that electro-optics and lasers were the booming fields. And by booming fields, I don't mean a transient fad, chaos theory. I mean, the ones with tremendous growth in the types of products coming out and in manufacturing size and market size. So if you were looking to start graduate school in the fall of 2021, this fall, like many of the students listening to us, what field or what topic would you see as a booming field, and why?
Well, one that just stands out to me is is artificial intelligence and its tie into robotics. Um, the, the changes we're going to see and the evolution of uh, AI, even in transportation systems, is going to be immense. It's going to really, I think it's going to really change transportation in so many ways, as well as other areas of production, manufacturing. Uh, it's going to be a big one, and all those things tie into space too, which of course I'm interested in, but it's going to make space exploration even more robust than what it is now. Um, on the other side of that, and it's related in a lot of ways, I think microbiology is going to be a continuing growing field as we are able to apply technology, even artificial intelligence, but better ways of looking at cell structure and microbiology in general. Great advances are going to occur and be available there.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've talked about fine successes in your career here, and but I want to ask, for the benefit of our student listeners, did you ever encounter a situation as a student or as a professional where you found yourself genuinely unsure if you could succeed? You feared you were in over your head, and how did you work through this?
Yeah, I can say that just about every time I had an opportunity for a significant advancement or change, uh, I always was sitting there thinking, all right, can you really do this? Are you beyond your capabilities? And that occurred. And the thing, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. The thing that enabled me to be successful was to keep learning and to understand that if I that I had the background and capabilities to learn what I needed to do to be successful in that next thing. And that was how I addressed that. I can tell you there are very few times when I had a significant opportunity that was afforded to me that I sought out, that I didn't have some questions about my own ability, my current level of knowledge and expertise to be successful in that position or at that activity. I had to learn to be successful there.
Very good. Lifetime learning. Okay. So along the path, you and I have both seen business management trends come and go, and one after the other. But have you observed any enduring concepts, or what are the enduring concepts that persist through these fashion changes that may be vital for students to keep in mind in the decades ahead?
I had the good fortune of working for Alan Mulally when he was with the Boeing Company and I was with the Boeing Company. Alan Mulally, for those that don't know, was an engineer who became the chief executive for Boeing Commercial Airplanes, and then went from there to become the CEO and chairman of the board of Ford Motor Company, and was transformative in both places in the performance that he was able to get from his team. There are a few things that I remember very well from working with Alan Mulally that I think are enduring and that I personally used as I was able to take leadership positions and executive management positions. Um, he, uh, he, uh, he was very fundamental in the data speaks. Data. He wanted data, and that was what spoke to him. And he required that of his leadership teams and his management teams. So, database, vision driven, peer collaboration. If there was something that I found different, was his ability to make peers responsible for the performance of their peers. So fiefdoms weren't allowed. If somebody's having trouble and you have a way of helping him and you're not helping him, you are the failure, not the one with the problem. That concept and the way he would bring teams together to be able to work together to a common vision, but as concerned about the success of their peers and their peers' business as they were theirs, was a fundamental concept that I found very empowering. And one of the ways he enabled that was he made it okay to ask for help. In fact, if you needed help and didn't identify it, then that was not appropriate. And if you knew someone needed help and you had a way of doing it, you didn't likewise. That was inappropriate. So that peer collaboration brought on by being okay to say, this is a need. I need this help. And seeking that from not just Alan Mulally or the CEO, but from the peer concept, the peer group that you work with. That's one that worked for me. I learned it from Alan. He was immensely successful with it. I think it lasts.
That's exciting. It'd be fun to work that way. So, you've spoken with reporters, journalists, book authors, and similar about spaceflight countless times. I'm sure you've lost count. What advice would you give our students for talking to the media about complex technical topics, and why would a scientist or researcher wish to do so?
Well, first, it's incredibly important for people that live in a technical world to be able to talk and explain what they're doing and what's happening to the media or to the public. There can be varying reasons for it. One is, and I'll use NASA as an example, public support of NASA's activities and was so terribly necessary for funding to come to NASA to continue to do that. Now you can take that and you can apply it to someone in a business with a product or an idea. You need support to be able to take it to its full capability or fruition. If you don't have that support, it might not happen. And quite often the people that are going to provide that support are not going to be the same have the same technical savvy as the people that you work with, the people that you work for, and therefore you have to be able to explain to them in language that anybody can understand what it is that you're doing and why it's important and and what it can lead to. So that's why it's important to do it. How you do that, you have to make a basic assumption. Well, you can't assume that your audience has a particular level of understanding, technical understanding. You have to go and learn and figure out what they have. So if I'm going to talk to a reporter from, say, Aviation Week and Space Technology, they're going to have a certain level of technical understanding that I can talk to and engage them and have a meaningful and useful conversation or interview with them. If it's a public group, that you might have to assume they have, a basic level of science, but not a whole lot of understanding of how science is applied through engineering or through scientific endeavor. So you talk to them at a different level. You have to make that translation, much like the Capcom and Mission Control. You have to take the intent and make it understandable by the person taking action. And so you have to be able to do that. And it's important that you do that because you need the support, more often than not, of the public, the media, Congress, all of those things, lots of times, depending upon the level of your activity and what kind of support you need, you have to be able to communicate in a way that is understandable. And it's taking basic concepts. And I'll give an example. And when we talk about atmospheric drag being the way that energy was managed by the space shuttle on reentry to the atmosphere, what's a simple way of talking about atmospheric drag? And I always use the example, hey, you're going down the road 60 miles an hour and you stick your hand out the window. What happens? Your arm comes flying. That's atmospheric drag. You have to find little things like that that communicate a complex concept into something that everybody can understand.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got one more for you. All right. And this I draw from the generation before me. In 1950, cross-country air travel existed in the U.S., but really was affordable to very few. All right. The train and the bus were much more common. 40 years later, 1990 or so, people like my parents could pick up the phone and on a whim buy an airplane ticket and fly across country the next day just to see their grandkids. So it became a much more affordable product. Right now, 2021, suborbital space tourism, which is about to start, the Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, is affordable by the very few right now. Could a price drop occur over the next 40 years so that the students listening to us today might celebrate their 60th birthday by saying, hey, let's go fly into space and back today? Is that reasonable to hope for? What do you think?
I think it is. It's interesting in that if you look at how access to space has really not progressed rapidly over the last 50 years, largely limited by propulsion technology. I think is probably the one thing that has limited. It's expensive and hard to get mass or people into Earth orbit or into space. Um, I'm excited about things like what SpaceX is doing because they really are addressing some of the things that were that's too hard, it's too expensive. They're finding ways of quickly advancing concepts of propulsion and access to space, the cost of the systems to get to space. I don't know how much more quickly that's going to change. It's clearly changing enough to where we're starting to see the limited opportunities to get to suborbital space. They're still very expensive options now for going to orbital space. Um, those will come down. I'm just not sure at what rate it's going to happen because of that limit on that major thing, which is how, the propulsion systems that are required to get to orbit. When we break through on there, then I think that things will change.
Very nice. Yes, of all the directions, up is the most expensive one to travel.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I hope I'm right. And when our students are in space, they'll say, "What do you know? Old Professor Collicot, he was right about something." So, Dick, before I close up today, what have I missed? Do you want to add any comments? Take the floor and add what you will.
Well, I don't know if we're going to have an opportunity in the later in the live thing to take questions. I'd be willing to do that.
Yes, we will.
Yeah. But no, I I would just add that I'm excited to be a part of this event. I have a great respect for what the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation does and providing astronaut scholar identifying astronaut scholars and providing them with scholarships and other benefits of being named a scholar. Uh, and pleased to be able to do that with Purdue this year.
Well, thank you very much. Those are great words for our students, and thank you so much also for fitting us in. It really shows your support for the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, and we really appreciate it. And thank you very much.
My pleasure.